I know where there's some, right here in the hall, clerk.
No, Molly, I have no.
I'm waiting for a tube, and so while I'm waiting, I decided to go ahead and finish up the rest of the capacitor work, or most of the rest of the capacitor work. Anyway, so this is not filler in particular, but catching up with all the odds and ends that remained undone on the underside of the radio. Hope you enjoy, and the next time I promise we'll have tubes in it and power it up and see what happens. I'm making my way through the radio, replacing capacitors in bakelite blocks. I've got this one done, this one done, this one done, and this one done. I'm still wiring this one back up. But I came here to where I need to do some. They've crammed a lot of stuff in this one corner, unfortunately. And amongst the stuff they've crammed in here is this mica mold capacitor, and I wanted to stop and talk about mica mold capacitors for a moment. And the reason why is because of the name. Here's a real mica capacitor. It's a Cornell Dublier, I think, over here. See if I can zoom out. Yeah. Yes, Cornell Dublier, actual mica capacitor inside a plastic mold. These aren't worth checking because they almost never fail. They're incredibly reliable, last for years, decades, decades and decades. These, on the other hand, the ones made by mica mold, are not mica. They are a waxy paper cap like this guy right here, stuffed inside a plastic housing. So they'll often be cracked. They'll certainly be leaky, and certainly not be the value marked on the case. So whenever you run across a mica mold capacitor, make sure you pull it out and replace it with a real a real mica capacitor. In this case, which is one of these guys, little tiny. This is 110 picofarads. I've got 100 picofarad here. That should work for us. It's this capacitor right here. It's 0.00011 microfarad capacitor right here. This is another. Do I want to say that? I was going to say this is another noise reduction capacitor, like these. Often when you see a capacitor of a smallish value tied from a signal line, which this one is, to ground, it's to reduce noise. Any high frequency noise that ends up in the circuit will just be routed through the capacitor and sent to ground. In this case, this looks more like a coupling capacitor here, where it's coupling some feedback from the primary, or from the secondary probably, of the local oscillator back to the primary of the local oscillator, just to make sure that this thing in fact oscillates. So that's what I believe this 0.00011 microfarad cap is. Anyway, it's a mica mold. We don't like mica molds, so I'm going to pull it. At the same time, I've got a traditional waxy paper cap back here. I can't tell the value yet, and it has this, to me, mystery item. It's running right across here. It's connected from here to here across this thing in red plastic, or red, some kind of red conductor. So I haven't looked at the schematic yet to see what this is, and I'm about to do that. so that I know I need to pull that out and replace it anyway. I want to know what's in that sleeve, just because I'm curious. So we'll take a look at that next on the schematic and see if I can find it. What I do know is that it's... What do I know? I know it has a lot of connections. Let me look under here. Oop. Oh yeah, it's going back. So this connects to this tube socket right here, which is the 78 tube, and it's connecting to pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pin 5 of the 78 tube. So if we take a look at the 78 tube, which is right here, here's pin 5. And it appears to be the cathode and the suppressor grid tied together. And that goes over here to this 200 ohm resistor and a 0.18 microfarad capacitor going to ground. So that might be, let's see. Yeah, so that's it. This is probably the capacitor that's just tied across this resistor. Why they put the resistor in the red tube, I don't know. I don't know. It may be a resistive coil of wire, but I will pull it out and we'll take a look at it. But first I have to get this undone. By the way, if you're looking at the old resistors here, these are carbon comp resistors. This one here actually checked out it's within tolerance, so I'm going to keep that one. This one is too high. It's probably 25% high. I haven't checked this one yet, but I'm keeping those that I can keep. I'm obviously replacing the ones I can't keep, and sometimes with extraordinarily long leads, because the originals had extraordinarily long leads. They were extraordinarily big resistors, and they had extraordinarily big long leads. So I'm going to start by excavating this mica mold out of here. That'll give me a little more room to pull this waxy paper cap out, and we can take a look at the mystery item inside the red tube, which we expect is a resistor. This end of the mica mold connects to this resistor and down to this coil, which is the oscillator transformer right here. So I'll clip this mica mold out. So that's one end of it. And the other end is right here. And there it is. I don't know how they got away with calling them mica molds for as long as they did, decades, because they had nothing to do with mica, and they failed with some regularity. Mica is extraordinarily stable capacitor. A capacitor made with mica is a terribly stable capacitor. This guy is not. It's just crap. So I don't know why they got away with that for so long, but they did. Telling a story and selling it cheaply enough, I guess. Put it in a bag of wounded parts. Okay, now we have some room in here to see. Here's the local oscillator coil right here. Here's that resistor, which is this guy right here, 5,100 ohms. and that one has to be replaced, number 10. And this is the capacitor we just clipped out of the circuit. And this is what's going back in there, about there. But first I have to clean this up. I have to get the old resistor off here. I have to also check this one and perhaps remove it as well. We'll see. Let's take a look at this guy right here. It's really hard to read the color code on it anymore. You can see some orange, you can see some red, but the clue is where it's connected on this command. It's connected here to the micromold capacitor. It's this 32K resistor right here, and we'll give that a quick check and see. You can measure resistors in circuit. They should always be lower than, they will never, if they're working correctly, they'll never be higher than the written value. So if this resistor is working correctly, it'll be somewhere less than 32,000 ohms. This one's 2977, so I'm suspecting it's still okay. I will leave it in circuit and not worry about it. Just leave it in place. Let's measure the value of this carbon composition resistor here. Comes original with radio. It has, as all of these do, a body color, and in this one it's very vague, but the majority of the body is green, so that indicates a 5. So it's body end. The end is brown, and then there's the dot, and that's orange, or used to be orange, looks to me like. So that means it's a 51,000 ohm resistor, and it's connected to pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, pin 6 of the 6A7. So here's pin 6 of the 6A7. There's our 51,000 ohm resistor right there. And let's see if it's within 20%. That's a pretty good tolerance. It's 57.6. So 57.6, well, 5,100 times, 51,000 rather, times 1.2 will give you the upper tolerance, and I think that's 60 some odd. So I think this is within tolerance. So we'll keep this resistor. And there we go. We have an actual silver mica capacitor replacing the mica mold capacitor in place. Now we'll move on again, because I haven't hooked this capacitor back up because I need some maneuvering room to get this paper cap out of here and get it replaced. And measure, what I'll do is cut one end of the paper cap, then I can measure across here and see if there's a resistor in there. I'll also look at the schematic and see where the one end of this connects. These are wired in parallel, so I'll see where this end connects down here as well. As I was following the schematic, I ran into an oddity, and I knew about it from the beginning, but I'd forgotten, and that is that the release 5 of this circuit, this is the schematic for release 1, release 5 is different. And I discovered that when I was trying to make sure that pin 5 of the 78 tube here was connected to pin 6 of the 6A7 tube, which it is not. In this radio it is not. Which reminded me to go look at this schematic. Now this schematic, if you happen to work on this particular release of this radio, you're going to run across this schematic. This is on radiomuseum.org. You have to kind of search for it, but it's out there. And there are some oddities about this that you need to be aware of. First of all, you need to be aware that it was done, this version of the schematic was done by a guy named Diego Herranz. It's for the January 1 release of 1935, but it was done in November of 2018. That's very tiny print, you probably can't read it, but I can barely make it out. So this schematic updates this one. There's no, I have not run across an original Philco schematic for release 5 of this circuit, but Diego did one for us. But there is something to be aware of it, and that has to do with nomenclature for capacitors. For example, what's a good example? Right here. There's a capacitor right here, part of this capacitor bank. This is on the original schematic, and it's called capacitor 20. It's 0.05 microfarad. On Diego's schematic, the very same capacitor, I'll make sure I'm getting it, is right here. It's C20, but it's labeled 500K. Now the 500K means 500 picofarads, or 500,000 picofarads, I should say. 500K is 500,000 picofarads. Same thing as 0.5 microfarads on this schematic. So that don't let that throw you off. That's just a different nomenclature, a different naming convention, if you will, for someone who did us the favor of creating this schematic. The other thing that this schematic has that the release 1 doesn't have is the fact that pin 5 of the 78 tube goes to this little RC network right here and then the ground. Likewise, pin 6 of the 6A7 does the same thing. It's going on to some other stuff too. But these two are not the same set of components. This one is a different set than this one. And if we look in the radio, this is the 6A7 right here. And if we look in there, we can see on pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 6A7, which is right here. That should go down to a 300 ohm resistor with a 90,000 picofarad capacitor in parallel with the resistor. Well, the pin on the socket is connected to this mystery thing here that's in this woven shield, and what that turns out to be is that resistor. And we can prove that by measuring the resistance from this point on the tube to here, and we should get around 300 ohms. And what we get is 329.5 ohms. So that's fine. We'll leave that in place. That's exactly what it should be. Again, that's here. Let's look at the 78 tube and this 400 ohm resistor. Well, the 400 ohm resistor is this red mystery one right here. And the 78 tube is down in the corner down here. So if I measure across that resistor from there to there, it's unsoldered, desoldered. I don't know if you can see it better there. It's 403 ohms. So that's just fine too. The only thing that we need to do here is replace this cap with something that isn't a waxy paper cap from the 1930s, which I'll do now. What I'm going to do here is just cut these wires for this capacitor. I'll cut that one there. There's one that you can't see, but it looks the same under here. So I'll cut the capacitor off there too. That will leave me a couple of little wires already joined to this resistor, this wire resistor in this red tube. And then I'll do some pigtails and attach the new capacitor using pigtails. Now, new capacitor. You'll recall that the schematic called for a 50K capacitor right there. 50K is 50,000 picofarads. 50,000 picofarads is the same as 0.05 microfarads. 0.05 microfarad capacitors aren't much commonly available anymore, but 0.047 microfarad capacitors are, and that's what this is. This is a 473 using the quote-unquote new nomenclature. It's a 0.047 microfarad capacitor, and that's what's going to replace this paper cap right here. So it's a Philco original, part number 30-4020S. It does have a marker for the foil side. The foil side is the side of the, remember this is a couple of aluminum sheets wound, or two aluminum sheets, can't remember, wound with a paper in between them, wound in a circle in a tube. And the outer one connects to this end, the inner one connects to this end. Very often marked that way so that you could get maximum shielding. If this end ran to ground, you would shield the capacitor from some electromagnetic noise rather. So that's our old capacitor, and I'll fit our new one in there. And there's the new capacitor in place right here, right across this wire resistor. So that's the last of the waxy paper caps, except for this one and this Bakelite box here. I'll finish reconnecting all these leads, and I've got a couple of resistors to check out here too. This guy right here with the white body, and this one with the orange body as well. So I've got to check these two before I can move on from this section, but we're getting there. Another oddity relative to the schematic and what's in the radio. Right here we have these two resistors connected to pin 3, pin 2, pin 3, this pin right here of the 6A7. Now the old schematic calls for pin 3 of the 6A7 pin 3 to be connected to this junction of a 51K resistor and a 10K resistor. That was for release 1. This new schematics for pin 3 show pin 3 coming down here, being connected directly to pin 3 of the 78, but down here, and there's a 100K and a 39K. The 100K goes to ground, 39K goes on up to this trimmer and on over to the output tube. So these are our two resistors right here. This one is an orange body with a white end dot, and who knows what, another orange dot. Maybe there might be another color on here, but that's undoubtedly this 39K. It shows the new resistor and then the new schematic for release 5. This one right here isn't quite right. It's supposed to be 100K. It actually has a white body, which is a 9. It looks like an end dot of black, which would be 90, and then 3 zeros for the orange, which would be 90K. So it's got a 90K in it. Schematic calls for 100. I'm going to go ahead and put 100 in there. That's way out of tolerance. Both of these, well, I don't know if this one is. Actually, let me see if this 39K is way out of tolerance. May or may not be. I know the 100K is around 70. So let's see what we have here. $49K.